in conversation with Helene Usherwood and Elizabeth Theobald. And we're continuing our series of discussions around supporting candidates either into their first non-executive director role or indeed to develop their portfolio career of non-executive director roles. So thank you for both joining and welcome.
Hello. Thanks, Nicki.
I'd like to ask you both, if I was about to embark on a NED role, and I appreciate this is probably very different sector to sector and organisation to organisation, but how would I prepare for my initial conversations and interviews with headhunters, and also how would I prepare for the interview with the organisation that I was applying to?
Thanks, Nicki. I think in terms of the headhunter interview, or executive search interview with prospective kind of trustees, for example. So I've worked on some of the big ones like, the chair of Battersea Cats and Dogs or the National Autistic Society and things. For those kinds of interviews, I think for the majority of candidates, and it depends what level they're at, to be honest. So if they're stepping up to their first board role, the interview might feel slightly differently than if they're an experienced trustee or NED, but essentially they tend to be more informal conversations because a career path is already proven to some extent because of the level that people are expected to be at for board roles in the main. And so we'll want to know things from you like your motivation and your value set and why this role in particular, and I'm thinking particularly about the not-for-profit sector. There needs to be a really strong values connection or a passion for the work that those organisations do. Their work is so vital. They fill a really important gap in our kind of public services. And so the board roles couldn't be more important. And so we need to know, and the not-for-profits need to know that people are joining their boards for the right reasons. So that part of the interview, the why you're applying for this, why would you want to do this, may seem like a warm-up question, but it's actually really important and something that people should have thought about. So it will feel quite informal, but actually it is quite formal as well. We'll also be wanting to know things from you around practicalities. Do you have the time to commit to this? Are there any conflicts of interest that you might be able to think about? Will you be able to make it in person to the meeting? So we want to know about the practicalities. But during our conversation about you, why you'd want the role and what you feel you'd bring in terms of your strengths, the other really key thing here is style. And that's partly about, having confidence, gravitas, being succinct and clear in your communication, being able to listen to others and not talk over people, asking appropriate questions. So all of these kind of, people call them soft skills, but the further and further up, the more senior you get, the more important those skills become. So I think those things are really key for, prepping for a conversation with an executive search partner.
And Helen, what would you say then about the interview process with the organisation?
Yeah, look, interviews are scary things for some people, and I think adrenaline is a wonderful thing, but sometimes it can be your worst enemy in an interview setting. So I think what you need to remember is to take your time. Don't feel rushed to answer questions. I think really think about the question that's being put to you. As Elizabeth has already sort of suggested, I think really think about the structure of your responses. So you need to think about your conception of an idea, so that strategy, that strategic element, which is really key for a non-executive director, how you've maybe enabled others to make it an operational reality. So it's about that oversight, sort of that piece for a non-exec. But also the bit that lots of people forget to sort of mention is the outcome. So actually, what's been the impact of that work? Try, if you can, to give, again, some of those hard metrics to really sort of evidence scale or complexity or particular challenges that had to be overcome. I think it really evidences some core skills that you will see in required of most trustee, governor, non-executive director roles. I think it's also really important, if this is your first interview for a role of this nature, that you're not necessarily coming across as being too operational. That can also be a challenge, because you're sort of drawing on your executive experience. So I totally understand the challenges in that, but it is about maybe thinking about the language that you're using to describe some of those executive experiences, but a way that really translates very easily into a non-executive context. So collaboration, partnership, maybe if you've had oversight of a particular project or program of work, how you've worked with others. A key part of any board role is that ability to work in partnership with others. So evidencing that's important. And just be prepared. I think Elizabeth and amongst us, has probably spent hours in interviews, and you can always tell the candidates that have actually invested time reading about the organisation, the wider sector issues that may be irrelevant to that particular organisation. And it really impacts on the quality of the responses that you then receive, because you can see that people have actually really thought themselves into the role as well. There's probably a couple of other practical tips as well. So we're seeing a lot of interviews run online since pandemic, and that continues. So if it is online, test your tech before you start. Does the camera work? Does the sound work? But also, if you're having to do a presentation, make sure you know how to actually share the slides on screen. So again, we all think we're pretty competent at these things, but in an interview situation, nerves may just get the better of you as well. So I think the last bit I'd say is that when you're leaving the room, it's interviews for me are about reassuring the people on the other side of the table. That is the purpose of an interview. You're reassuring people that you have the skills, capability, passion, and values to make a lasting contribution. So really make sure that you have conveyed that in terms of your responses, and leave the room feeling that you've managed to get that message across.
And what about questioning? Is that important in an interview like this? Also asking a lot of questions of those that are, the board that are interviewing you?
It's really important that if you're going to join a board, that you've done your due diligence. You need to make sure that organisation is financially sustainable. You will be legally and financially responsible for that organisation if you join their board. And of course, there are indemnity insurances, but nobody wants to get into a bad position. So do your due diligence. Make sure you ask questions about anything you're not sure about. Try to observe the culture. Try to get a one-to-one with the chair to make sure you can work together. That's such a key working relationship, that if you don't gel and that's not going to work, it's not the board for you. So there are lots of things that you should be looking out for, I think, both in terms of, as I say, upfront due diligence, but also on the day and throughout those meetings, and making sure it's the right thing for you. It's a long-term commitment.
Definitely. I also think if you're asking also about questions at the end of an interview, where the opportunity to ask questions, of course ask them, but pick the questions carefully. Often on very tight schedules, you want to make sure that opportunity to ask questions counts, that you're not just asking sort of what the time commitment is for the role. That should be covered off way before the interview. So and I think we've all possibly sat in interviews where the candidate asks too many questions and it goes on for slightly too long. So one or two is great, but make sure that they're good ones.
Getting the balance right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you both.
Thank you.